I want to let you know I got your emails regarding that new assignment that the professor gave you, and I apologize that I'm not able to make it this week to any of the sessions with you all, which, by the way, I won't charge you. But I'm making this video for you all just as a little helper to the prelude of what the professor wants. But my understanding is that it has to do with the conscience, the individual conscience, abortion and contraceptives, and where the position is of the Catholic Church. I'm going to give you the conscience aspect at the latter part, at the second part of this video. But before I do that, I want to get started with a brief synopsis, a brief history, if you will, of contraception and abortion within the Catholic Church. One thing that you need to know, first of all, is what are known as the three sources of truth that exist within the church, and that is the magisterium of the laity, the magisterium of the theologian, and the magisterium of the hierarchical. What is the magisterium of the laity? Well, the laity is basically the people of the church, the people who are considered Catholics, who are baptized Catholic. They are what make the heart and soul of the church. At the same time, you have what is known as the magisterium of the hierarchical, and that's exactly what it sounds like. The hierarchical includes the priest, the bishop, the cardinals, all the way to the pope. It's a structure of authority within the church, and believe it or not, it is the most dominant force that drives the church. So if you believe that the laity is the heart of the church, then you believe that the hierarchical is the engine, if you will. And lastly, and most importantly, you have what is known as a hierarchy of the theologians, and that is exactly what it sounds like. It is people, theologians, ordained individuals, members of the Catholic Church, who study church doctrine and who, in an essence, try to find a way to make it better. You know, as time passes, it's an ever-evolving religion. I mean, 4th century Christians are not the same as 20th century Christians / Catholics, but for aspects of this class, we're going to focus just on Catholics. And when I mean Catholics, obviously I'm talking about Christian Catholics, but to not confuse those of you who might be so familiar with different branches of Christianity, we'll just call them Catholics. And speaking of theologians, I want to mention 4 very important, and in my opinion, the smartest 4 figures that have existed throughout the Catholic Church or all these centuries. Well, there's 5, but we'll stick to 4 for this essence, which is Aquinas, Augustine of Hippo, Origen of Alexandria, and John Henry Newman. There we go. Each of these members of the Catholic theologian magisterium have had very different opinions and very different understandings on and views on abortion and contraceptives. The most recent one has been John Henry Newman. He is beatified and he's on his way to become a saint. He said that if the Catholic Church did not listen to the laity, they would lose the heart of the church. In other words, he treated this as almost a democratic, if you will, process that the church should do what the majority of the churchgoers, Catholics, want. Obviously, this is not an easy task, and it has not been done, but nonetheless, he tried to do it. But I go back all the way to the 4th and 5th century with Augustine. Augustine was a very immature individual. He was a very wise but foolish man. That sounds like a paradox there and like a double standard, but he was a very foolish man in that aspect that he considered sex in any form, either it be for pleasure or to procreate, he considered it a sinful act. He said that the essence of the sin was the pleasure. The pleasure, the actual physical orgasmic pleasure that both male and female would feel was sinful. So therefore, one should not have sex. I mean, that's a very dubious argument to say the least. But again, even at that, he says, I understand that people are going to have sex. And when they do, when they shouldn't, abortions may be allowed. Back then, there was no Trojan or there was no Plan B, obviously, but they did have something called as wasting your seed of man on the earth, which, without getting too R-rated here, literally meant for a man to ejaculate and let it fall onto the surface of the world, which is let it fall on dirt. That was not a good thing to do. Matter of fact, in the Old Testament, it is said that that God struck somebody down for that reason. But that's, again, teachings of the canon, which we won't get into. But then you have, after him, you have Thomas of Aquinas. Thomas of Aquinas in the 13th century went even further. He took it a step further. He was very detailed into what he was doing, and he said that there was many instances in which abortions were or should be accepted. What are those instances? Well, for example, if the reputation of the mother was at danger, it should be allowed. If the health of the mother was a danger, an abortion should be allowed. If the family's standing in society was at risk of being devalued, an abortion should be allowed. Again, that's getting very, very specific, but again, this St. Thomas of Aquinas was one of the smartest, if not the smartest theologian of all of them. But then we get to the fifth person that I said I wasn't going to talk about, and this man was named, he was a Jesuit, first of all. His name was Tomás Sanchez. He took it even further than Aquinas did. This is in the 16th century, by the way. This is the one time, and this is probably a secret that the Catholic Church does not want its laity to know about, but in the 16th century, the magisterium of all three, of the laity, of the hierarchical, and of the theologians, were in line. For once, the teachings of all three were in agreement that an abortion or contraceptive should be allowed. Especially, Tomás Sanchez wrote a very famous essay, which I can't think of at the moment, but he gave specific scenarios and details. He said, for example, if a woman is to be married to a man but is slightly pregnant by another man, an abortion is justified. He said that if the woman's reputation or health was at risk, an abortion should be justified. So what am I trying to get with all of this? Well, when your professor asks you, and if you want to hit this nail on the head, when he says, what is the position of the Catholic Church on abortion and contraceptives, your response should be, well, during what period? You have the 4th century, the 16th century, and then you have, again, the 13th century, which different teachings were being taught. Kind of like the 4th century Christians struggled with the divinity of Jesus. Was he human? Was he divine? Until you had the Council of Nicaea that settled that. Well, there's something very similar in the teachings of abortion and contraceptives, and this happened in 1962 with John the 23rd, who was the Pope at the time, commissioned a group of people. And this group of people consisted of all three branches, like I said. They were theologians, there was priests, there was cardinals, there was bishops, and most importantly, there was members of the church, the laity. And don't think that these were just randomly chosen members of the church. These people were chosen specifically as good, honest, 100% Catholics, if you will. But this was done with a secret agenda that the church had, the hierarchical had. Again, it was connected. The hierarchical, which is the Pope, commissioned this meeting, this adjournment, if you will. And this was done in hopes that the voting that would result in this commission would favor what was still being practiced since the 16th century. That's not the way it turned out. That is not the way it turned out. And the shocking truth is that there was, I believe, 60, let me see if I can find it, 68 members that voted out of this commission. The vote of 54 of them came out that there should be change, that there should be reform. Only 12 voted against reform and change. And the decision for change did not happen. Why did this not happen? Well, those that did vote for it said that there should be some form of contraceptives allowed within the context of marriage. You know, for example, a couple who is married in the eyes of the Catholic Church before God should be allowed to take contraceptives so that they can prevent any unwanted marriages, and I'm sorry, any unwanted children until they were right for it. So again, this was not said everybody get free contraceptives, but it was formed within the context of marriage that was accepted in the doctrine of the Catholic Church. But for those 12 that did not, for those 12 that did not vote for change, they went to John the 23rd and they persuaded him to not go with the majority vote. And how did they persuade him? Well, it is believed that they persuaded him by saying that if he did this, his infallibility would be tested. His infallibility would be questioned. And you cannot have the highest ranking officer of a hierarchical ladder be questioned. You don't do that. That's just not something that is done. So in 1968, when Paul VI ended the commission, he published what is now known as Humanae Vitae. And in that publication, it denounces all forms of contraceptives and all forms of abortions, even though a majority part of the laity, a majority part of the theologians, and a majority part of the bishops and cardinals voted for some sort of reform or change to the doctrine and the policy of the church. So you ask yourself, how can that be? Well, is it an infallible pope? Is it because change is something that they are not used to? But in any event, that is the last form of argument or commission that has since happened. 1962 commissioned in 1962, and a decision was made in 1968. And until now, we obviously all know the standing of the church on abortions and contraceptives. So that is a brief, like I said, a brief history of the church and that. And now we're going to get into the more hard and the more detailed in the second video that I send you guys. And that's going to deal with conscience, the individual, which is existentialism, which is my brand of tea. Conscience, the individual, and the Catholic Church. We're going to deal with excommunication. We're going to deal with medical practices. We're going to deal with various examples that will lead you to understand how your conscience ultimately is the decision maker, or should be the decision maker, when the church teaches you otherwise. So I'll get back to you on a second video.